just a few weeks out from the release of Camino Adios, second album from Scarlet Goodbye. How are you guys feeling? Has it have you processed it yet? Is the anticipation building?
Certainly a hurry up and wait situation. This one, I think, Jeff, we probably finished recording it maybe 6 or 7 months ago now.
Yeah, and I had the same thought the minute that the question came out. Was like, we've been waiting for it, and we had it teed up to release, and then it got delayed, and so, yeah, I would say over anticipation is
Bring it.
the word.
Yeah, I mean, we had the artwork done for a while, and it's kind of a little bit of a trick. We decided to do vinyl, and that usually lays you up some time because it's pretty hard to get. And I don't know how many vinyl records we're going to sell, but as longtime music people, it's kind of something cathartic about seeing your music in that format. It's just kind of, I don't know. It's kind of probably not as important as we make it out to be, but I'm glad that we did vinyl, and that was the hang up or the hold up time-wise.
I'm a vinyl guy myself, obviously. And a lot of people will say, like, oh, there's no point, this, that, and the other, but there's something about holding it. It's the physical product, or
cleaning your dime bag of weed on a record with a gate. That's what I remember in the 70s,
Yeah, I got to tell you guys this. So yesterday I picked up, we got some of the vinyl. Virgin shipped me 100 copies, and I picked it up yesterday, and this time, Cameron, we did the gatefold or whatever you call it,
Sure.
And so I'm playing tonight at Astor Cafe as a favor to another guy, and we had a rehearsal last night, and I brought it to the rehearsal and showed it to 4 people who are all 40, let's say, and they were mesmerized by this thing, and you open it up and it's got the pictures and the stuff. And when Dan and I were kids, I mean, this was how you bought one of these and you poured over it, you memorized, and then you played it 300 times. It's just so different. And watching them handle that vinyl last night and kind of, one at a time, kind of open it up and stare at it. And I just thought, well, that's all we used to do, for God's sake, So
right.
It's just so different.
I feel like my generation was on the tail end of that sort of thing. It was CDs when I was young, and we didn't have, you couldn't get on the internet and read everything about any artist. So you were digging through the lyrics, or if there was a magazine feature, it was a big deal. And a lot of that's lost today, it feels like. So it's nice to see a sort of resurgence in the vinyl world.
It's funny you mentioned that, Cameron, because we started touring in the early days of we were called Loud Fast Rules before Soul Asylum. We'd go from town to town, go to Spokane, Washington, and we say, well, something's happening here. But there were fanzines in every town, we're printed and they would kind of report the scene and what shows are coming to town. And you could tell towns that had a fanzine, in Minneapolis, one was called Your Flesh. And in New York, this guy Gerard had one called Conflict. But that was you could really see the difference in kids that would go to punk rock shows in towns that had a fanzine compared to towns that didn't. So I mean, it's kind of like the tin cans through a paper line, or a line phone thing. But it really, it's so different in this environment, obviously. And if you want to learn how to play Here Comes the Sun because you have to play it at someone's wedding in a day, some guy in Spain can show you how to play it, and you can learn it in 5 minutes on YouTube, So it's a realm, obviously.
I think there's something lost in that as well. By the time I picked up the guitar, you could just look up tabs, and I feel like it hindered my ability to learn to listen for many years because you can just read it. So whereas people back in the day were moving the needle back, and what was that part? There's just more of a magic to it or something.
Definitely. It's quicker now, though.
Yeah. For a lot of the debut and sophomore record for certain groups, sometimes bands will do sort of 2 pieces of a puzzle, the way, say, the Strokes or the Band. It's they could have been one long album. Sometimes they'll do that. Some groups will do 2 distinct pictures of themselves, like Tom Waits or the Killers or something. You guys feel like this album is pretty stylistically coming from a similar place to the first one, or is this its own sort of different thing? Of course, it's its own thing, but
I think
stylistically.
Sonically, it's really different sounding. I think Jeff produced it, and I think I think they're more like I think they're more like different statements in terms of what the cohesiveness of them. And I think the first record, we were kind of developing what we sounded like. But on this record, we'd start playing something in Jeff's studio, and we'd say, "Hey, this is starting to sound like, Scarlet Goodbye music." So we kind of like it kind of like when we were in the zone where things were coming together and it was cohesive. We could really like grab that pretty quickly and say, "Hey, this is what the band does." And then Jeff and I added a lot of vocal harmonies, and I think that's a thing that really makes the band kind of unique. And I think the way that our voices blend together is not all together common. So I think that's something that we worked at after we did most of the recording. We do like background vocals typically last. So yeah, I think it's different, and I think it sounds different, and it's a little bit maybe I don't know, more ambitious maybe in terms of the compositions.
I'd imagine early on it's about sort of finding an identity a little bit. Then once you have that established, it's a little quicker moving.
Yeah, again, from a production point of view, the first time, we did different things. Like today, Cameron, you probably know, like you can replace the drums instantly with,
right.
Pick your kit. And this time we didn't do that, which I liked better. To me, it sounds more like a band, and it's more raw and more emotional. And I think I love the first record. Nobody's listened to the first record more than I have in a variety of ways, and I love it. But this one is different, and it's not different in that. Oh, it's not the Scarlet Goodbye. It's actually more of the Scarlet Goodbye than the first one, I'd say.
For what it's worth, I think the mixes are great. It does have that band sound to it. It's more like an organic feel a little bit.
Exactly, yeah. Did you get vinyl? Did you get
I didn't get the vinyl. I've been listening digitally. So
okay, cool. If you're a vinyl guy, well, I'll send you a vinyl right away.
Oh, that'd be great. I would love a copy.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of the situation we have for recording is Jeff's in his house, and we have a studio on the top floor, and it's super nice, really relaxing. And, we record together. We made this little cubby hole for like the electric guitar thing, but we get together and the material is brand new to whoever plays keyboards, drums, and bass. They haven't even heard the material yet. And typically we'll do a session for 3 or 4 hours and record 2 songs. What we're really trying to do is we're trying to record the song as soon as it's cohesively written, before you start thinking about, oh, maybe I should change this part, or is this too redundant? Like, we just don't do any second guessing at all. And it's recorded typically, with just kind of shapes of maybe what lyrics might be and just really rough melody ideas for singing. And we just record them, and then we complete them after the tracks are done. So it's kind of, in my years of doing recording, typically you have to do a demo tape and hand it into your record company. And your record company would either proceed with you moving forward, recording, or say, hey, you guys need to write some more stuff. And that's when you get, your material gets kind of tentative or maybe belabored in self-doubt and stuff like that. So I think we have a thing that we're able to do where there's really no meters or filters on the writing. It's just we write it and go, hey, that's starting to sound like a song. Let's record it. And we do it immediately. And I think that's a really big part of our sound. Wouldn't you think, Jeff? I mean, that's kind of...
Absolutely. Cameron, do you record?
Yeah, I do some recording here at home, but I'm not in the studio,
There's a weird reality to it. And Dan and I both did big studio recording. I've done more of this kind of recording probably now, but Dan's now been doing it the last 4 years. And there's a weird moment where you're going to get the take. So you get in there, and as he's describing, and we're starting to play it, and then these guys are great, and you're on take 4, and then there's this weird energy where all of a sudden that take 5 is the main take, and then be like, okay, well, let's do 1 or 2 more, but then you're already over it, You know what I mean? There's just
Yeah.
a weird way they don't really know it, and there's an energy to that you capture if you're, because to Dan's point, I can't think of anything worse than, I mean, you record the stuff and you hand it in, and they're like, you know, blah blah blah. Then now you're tinkering, and you're not even recording yet, and you're hyper scrutinizing it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting away from that and capturing this other energy is, to me, the biggest weird part of it. That's cool, you know.
That's a great approach. I love Steely Dan as much as the next guy. Yeah, it's definitely different though than doing 77 takes and then capturing the energy of when it's sort of fresh. Tupac was a big proponent of that. He always wanted everything to be first take. It seems like you lose a little bit.
Probably the band. I mean, it seems like that's sort of the magic of some of their stuff, just sitting around, you know, in a home studio setting, and everybody applying what their craft is quickly and uniquely to a process. But we're pretty fortunate. We have a real good drummer and a great bass player. We worked with both Pat Frederick and Jeff Victor to play keyboards, and a lot of the stuff. This record's more keyboard, I think, driven in terms of the writing and stuff. So when we cut keyboards, typically we try to cut the piano or whatever the keyboard part live, so it wasn't just like thought of as an overdub.
Mm-hmm.
So like we actually get up in Jeff's studio, and I'm in this little crawl space, and we have a drum set, and there's a lot of bleed between the instruments, and it really, really becomes part of the sound. And like when you mentioned, you know, you can really hear people sitting in a room playing the music, because it's very, very much done like that. And there's some overdubs on the record. I mean, all the vocals are overdubbed, but there's a minimal. I mean, we basically try to keep all of the guitars and whatever keyboard part there is as tracked. And I think maybe on all but one or two of those songs, we were able to just keep the whole dynamic of the band playing together as a piece of music, and then do whatever edits and additions we needed to do at the end of that. So it's kind of really a magical way of recording. And in this band, for whatever reason, it's not particularly hard to get really good takes quickly with everybody. So I guess we're fortunate there.
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly something to be said about not cleaning things up too much, like the squeaky bass drum pedal in Good Times, Bad Times, Led Zeppelin. It's especially in today's like computerized age where everything is digital. You can hear the difference a little bit when the band is being a band rather than a bunch of takes spliced together.
I think that was the thinking about keeping the drum tracks on this and not replacing them and stuff too, because it just sounds like that room. It's like this, you know, it's kind of got wainscoting and a cove ceiling, and, you know, Jeff and I have been up there for hours. The room has a really identifiable sound, and on this record, it really sounds like that room and that space, and I think it's really cool. It kind of like a moment in time kind of thing.
Well, yeah, we actually went to a big famous studio and recorded first 4 songs, and then threw 3 of them away because it just wasn't the same.
Mm-hmm.
You know, then we went back up to the attic.
Yeah, we recorded 3 songs at the studio, and then we just kept replacing everything from the studio. We're like, damn, maybe we should just cut these over, because it was like, you know, really a different. The funny thing is that studio is called Creation. It's in Minneapolis, and in the real early '80s, I recorded a couple records there. And like I remember one night, it was 2 a.m. We were trying to find a tambourine to put on this track, and I barged into the studio, and there's a woman sitting there singing like a vocal take with a Lakers jersey on, and I just barged into her session. It was Paula Abdul. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, you know. And she couldn't be nicer. And I was just like, oh, what a dude, man, you know.
It's kind of like the story of Mary Jane's Last Dance. Tom Petty, they apparently did the demo, and then they took it to the studio and cut it like dozens of times and just couldn't get it right. And then what came out was ultimately the demo. They couldn't top the sound. I find that happens a lot with folks.
Everybody falls prey to that. The studio he's talking about, there was an engineer, Bruce Swedin, that worked there a lot in like the 60s and 70s, and he engineered the Michael Jackson stuff, you know, the big Thriller. And the legend is that they made 102 mixes of Billie Jean and used the second mix.
I think I heard something about that.
You know? It's just how it is, because it's so easy to go down the rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
Ann and I both gone way down there, and you get way down there, and then you're lost. It is true.
It can become something else, for sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned doing overdubs for backing vocals, which some things are necessary. You got to be careful and get like the precise sound. Backing vocals are usually one of those. I'm hearing a lot of Beatles on this record, but I kind of hear Beatles in everything. But as far as influences, was there anything you were listening to during the production that sort of maybe inspired the writing or the approach or anything like that? Or was it just kind of free form, your own deal?
You know, I spent so much time on this in the last record with the Scarlet Goodbye. Like, I try not to listen to much music when I'm writing, and Jeff and I get together, you know, maybe 3 or 4 times a month, and we have, you know, chord changes that we turn into these things. But I really try to psych out on listening to a lot of stuff. But I hear the Beatles thing. I mean, some of the keyboard parts on like maybe the bridge of that song Raylene is like really chimey, Beatle-y, kind of Sgt. Pepper's era stuff. And I think that's a common denominator. But I think the interesting thing about Jeff and I is we really grew up listening to different music, you know, entirely from, you know, and I think that like nothing's really off limits for us as like when we start writing stuff. And I think that we come to common places kind of sort of in an organic way. And I think we don't really talk about, like, for instance, the song that's called To Feel the Sun. Jeff wrote the music to that. I think it's the first song on the record. And it started off kind of being this really pretty, slowish, not really sluggish, but this real melodic. So we called the song Youngblood because it sounded like Jesse Cullen Young and the Youngbloods. And then we started recording it, and it turned into a completely different thing. And we probably only did 5 or 6 takes of that song, but it kind of turned into its own entity without any conversation from any of us about the direction it should go. That like literally just happened. Remember, this is different. We listened to it, we just started laughing because it was so different than the stuff that Jeff and I were sitting around writing in my basement. It was like a whole different place, you know?
You know, I agree with that. And I would say we don't ever talk about influences ever, I don't feel like. You know what I mean? We never. And I know there's a whole method for that. And if you were in a certain place, you might say, well, here, we're going to make this based on whatever. I would say, have never done it. Whatever's in there is just the organic reality of what the influences have been. And as Dan points out, and the influences are kind of wide because I listened to a bunch of stuff that he didn't listen to, and he listened to a bunch of stuff that I didn't listen to. Then there was the stuff we both listened to in the middle, but we've never really talked about any of that.
It's also like when we're recording, Jeff is the producer and the engineer, but as a writer and a singer, in the days of like Soul Asylum and the Golden Smog, you know, it was a little bit nerve-wracking for me to sing because I don't think anybody really likes to hear their own voice, but Jeff is really good at mentoring vocals. Like he says, he like looks for like a persona of this guy who's singing the song. Really doesn't need to push it so hard here because he's like, so he kind of creates this thing. I just sit there in this little room and, you know, like kind of find the guy that's supposed to be singing or narrating the song. And that's a real plus for Jeff because I worked with a lot of producers, and usually producers expect a vocalist to sound a certain way, and they get up on the mic and it's got to be pretty polished and pretty, you know, like, hey, that's pop music we're making, you know. But I think Jeff kind of sees idiosyncratic things in my voice, and it becomes part of the story and the equation, and that's something I'm very thankful for because we love background. We have so much fun singing backgrounds on the stuff after we finish it. Like we had Jeff's wife sang on a couple songs on Speedway, and we had these female choral singers that came in on Raylene. It was just gave me chills to listen to something that we'd written, get realized by people that have that much talent. I'm singing these just beautiful parts. I was just like humbled by what that added to our record.
That's a really cool point that he made because, Cameron, are you a singer-songwriter guy at all?
Singer might be a stretch, but I try.
But I mean, the genre of music, the singer-songwriter genre,
yeah,
right?
It's kind of what I came up on.
And there's a deal that I got onto a long time ago, which would be different than what Dan had experienced, which is when you're a singer-songwriter and you're a narrator of a story, when you're recording the vocals, it's always a question about, are you coming across as the guy? That's what we would call it, you know? And if I'm recording you and it's a song and you're telling me something in the song, just like with the take and you think you get the take, there's a weird moment where as the singer, you become the guy in the song. And I've seen this endless times. You know, you start and you're singing some track, you know, you're singing, it's getting cut. All of a sudden, you click in as the guy in the song. And I think that was new to Dan. And, which was cool to see him experience that, because I get what he's saying, you know, in the other idioms of it. It's like, hey, Dan, sing the lead vocal. You know, like, shut up and sing the lead vocal. And there was no room to become the guy. Or maybe there wasn't even a guy, I don't know. But then when it says the producer, you see the person become the guy and you go, okay, now you're there. Let's do two more, you know.
I think when the value is more associated with like the expression or the art than the result, you can kind of inhabit the material. And that's like the singer-songwriter thing, Bob Dylan. Somebody would hear his voice and standard producer type and be like, oh no, that's no good. But he's the guy, you know. A lot of people say like, oh, I like his songs, but only when other people sing them. But I love Dylan's own material. I really prefer him to sing it, warts and all.
Yeah, even like Time Out of Mind, it was a real different style for him, but the singing on that is just so heartfelt, just so beautiful. But, you know, I really think like making records that, you know, we did a couple of records that we spent 4 or 5 months and like, you know, after the songs were pretty much written, and it's just really hard to maintain your focus. Like when you leave Jeff's studio, you say, well, today we had the guys come in, we got 2 songs done, and I think we'll have to do some edits on one, the other one's on. So you feel like you accomplish something every day. And if you're endlessly going into a studio and you like what you're contributing to that record is so small every day, for me, I just like, not only, I just lose hope in the project. Like what are we doing here, you know? And you got a ping pong table and a pool table, and you know, it's just the whole thing. It's just
what
like,
are we doing here?
Catering.
It's really an abstract, you know.
I would imagine it's a lot more terrifying cutting vocals in like a studio where there's like this expectation and the red light, whereas now you can get great sounds.
Maybe our guy sitting there in the room. Yeah, I was being super brave. Yeah, I didn't care for that at all. It's not so bad doing background vocals, but you know, singing lead vocals in a studio situation. Plus, you know, you have guys like, specifically, I remember doing a record with Chris Kimsey, who was a pretty good guy. He made some Rolling Stones records and other stuff. And I was singing this song, and after about 3 or 4 takes, he's British. He's like, Dave, can you get in there and get up on the vocal? I'm like, I'm not hearing this, you know. And I was like he gave up on me after 10 minutes, you know. And I was just kind of sitting there, and it kind of put me in a bit of a funk for the rest of the record, to be honest.
Oh, God, I can't think of anything worse. Holy shit.
Yeah.
That's how I imagine it would feel if you like make demos and you're really proud of the material and you turn it in. You're like, all right, we're cooking, and they're like, I don't hear it. Where's the single? And it would take the wind out of your sails for like the entire process.
Well, I think they took the wind out of Dan's sails at the end for the entire game, right?
Yeah, we did this record in Florida. We had this new A&R guy. His name was Tim Devine. That's his last name, Devine. And he was giving us so much shit when we were getting a record together. I told him, like, we should name our record Divine Intervention. And he thought it was a great idea. You know, I was like, it was just like,
that's good.
Out of this world. I was like, dude, like, you know, like, we're not going to get together with this guy and write, you know, The Flame, because it's already been done, you know. But I am kind of proud of specifically Soulless on that we always, for better or for worse, we stuck to our guns. We didn't really do a lot of the things that the record company wanted us to do after our popularity was waning, you know. Things you would do would be, you know, someone get arrested or hire, you know, the Aerosmith hit songwriter to record something that's just cringe. We said, nah, we'll just fade into obscurity if that happens, rather than do that. Better off.
It seems like a lot of the nitpicky sort of things from the non-musical portion of the business is just that sort of nitpicky stuff. I think I saw a clip or something. I think it was Collective Soul. They were doing a mix, and the guy was like, "This track needs turned down, and this needs turned up." And they said, "Just send them the same thing back and say you did it." And they sent it back, and they're like, "It's perfect, thanks." And
Thanks for fixing that for me. I know.
like they're not really even listening. But
I think a lot of people that are into that business too, like producers that we've had in the past, they want to make sure that there's a really big problem that's makes everybody kind of tense, and then they want to be the person that fixes it, and then
right.
It's whether it's moving from a really comfortable studio that you got said, well, I don't like the sounds I'm getting in here because it just creates chaos and like a disturbance, and then for someone to be able to kind of pat themselves on the back at the end and say, yeah, I walked you guys through that, aren't you glad you got me? And just like, I don't know, I mean, music, it's just in that capacity, it's really easy to lose your path. I think a lot of bands that do that get signed to a major label that go from being super good friends that hung out together to have different places where they stay when you're making the record, different rides to the studio. You lose your whole path, and I really think that's reflected in the music you make.
There's the thing of when you start taking different buses to the show, but also people grow up and like it's in your like 20s or whatever, and this is true I think of people not in music. It's like you and your boys, but then people start getting married and building lives and families. It creates divides between people. And then with rock and roll, you obviously throw in like substance abuse and all these different variables, and it makes things really complicated. It's hard to maintain relationships, I would imagine.
And that's the norm, not the that's the normal way it goes, and guys that are in rock bands together, it's just, that's the commonality of it all, and it's really a true thing. So I mean, how many shows is Oasis going to last before like one of them goes off? I suppose there's enough money maybe there to smooth it all over for him, but seems like it's a powder keg,
With things as far as music, you said you guys would get together every so often and work on songs. How much hashing out are you doing of like chord changes and like just the details? Like I've been into Raylene specifically lately. I feel like it follows like on the surface what feels like a just like a DG sort of thing, but the changes are sort of unexpected. I think it goes to like C, and it creates like this tension, and the drums kick in like a measure late, and it feels like it's a little jarring in a good way. How much are you thinking about that sort of stuff, or is it just sort of happening organically?
Cameron, specifically on that song, Jeff wrote the changes for that, a lot of the changes on guitar, and he said, why don't you screw around with this on piano and see what you can come up with? But that's how that one started, Jeff, right? Didn't you have that as a guitar change?
Well, I said, Dan's got a crafty piano thing, and I just said, play these changes on piano and screw around with them. And it was the opening, D stuff. And then between that and Dan's, had you been to a funeral? How did that funeral happen?
Yes. Yeah, a friend of mine from the really early days of Loud Fast Rules, his name was Tom Aldridge, and I'd seen him recently. He was in AA with my girlfriend, so I'd seen him at some meetings, and I went to his funeral, and it was pretty sad. He kind of, in AA, they call it, he went out again, and he kind of just drank himself to death. But in his yearbook, they showed a picture of his high school yearbook, his senior year, and it said, we live to love, we live to cry, we live to laugh, we live to die. That's what he said in his yearbook picture. So I kind of took that down. I changed it a little bit. Initially, I wanted to be able to make the song about going to a guy's funeral, but I turned it into like going to your lover's funeral who dies. And I've kind of written from the perspective of someone that's asked to deliver a eulogy at such a just heartbreaking affair. And then Jeff's idea was to get like these choral singers in, and that just, for me, it just took it to such a different place. I was just done by it. Like it just takes over the track in a way I've never experienced before in my life, actually.
Beautifully done. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's got this feeling at times to it, like Up With People, or
Godspeed.
I would say kind of white it resonates. It's like it's also just a little bit white down there, which is in keeping with kind of the moment of it. And so that all worked out somehow.
What's it like producing that many, like a choir? Imagine that would be quite the endeavor. Or recording.
Well, they're really good singers. We just gave them the, you set up a couple mics, you get them standing in the right place, and then we just bed them parts, and they're just good, and they just sing the parts, and it starts to clip into place. I'm sure there would be way more elaborate ways.
That was 3 singers, so we just multi-tracked them. So there's 3 different. So yeah, it sounded. They filled it up really, but they had great pitch, and they would do their harmony inversions together. They wouldn't all just sing like here's a part. They sing unison on it.
Yeah.
So they did all the intervals and the harmonies with the 3 of them sitting there. And yeah, I think Jeff put 2 mics on it, and they were probably done in I'd say maybe 2 hours. Jeff, it was pretty quick.
Well, what did we do? Did we just do that, or did we do? I guess is that the only one they're on?
Yeah, Danny sings on Speedway.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
they on, yeah.
Yeah, so when you have the top-notch musicians like that, I guess it more becomes about just capturing the room, and everything else sort of falls into place.
Part of that is like the camera move 1 foot back. You are capturing the room, and there are 3 of them, and you got to blend it in real time.
The funny thing about that also is the second chorus that they sang. Jeff and I were trying to come up. We probably came up with the words 25 minutes before they came over and sang it. We're sitting at his studio, and so I wanted the second chorus to be different lyrically than the first chorus. So it's kind of the crazy thing, like you write something and you're unsure of whether it's going to resonate or be good, and then you hear someone sing it 25 minutes later, and you go, wow. So yeah, it's just kind of. I think we've been kind of lucky thus far with the recording. We haven't really had any huge setbacks. We haven't had other than going to the studio and try to reconfigure that way, which was a setback. It's been really smooth on both records.
Nice. Well, I think that is about all I have.
Cameron, thanks for the help.
Thanks so much for taking the time. Y'all have a good one.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.